right. When we left last time, we had been talking about Rogers. And we had been talking about humanism. And I said that I was going to pick up right about where Rogers was introducing or proposing conditions of worth, where I may not agree with everything with Rogers, just like I don't agree with everything with Freud. I think this is Rogers' flash of brilliance. He says that children begin to believe that they can get love, affection, approval if they will conform and do things, act certain ways to please the significant people in their life. That they will actually learn how to deny and distort feelings in order to please or be accepted by significant people in their lives. Like mom, dad, grandparents, Sunday school teachers, aunts, uncles, regular teachers. All these people will condition a child to act a certain way. Now, let's say, let me give you an example, okay? You got a little boy, and he's fallen off of his bicycle. And he's really scuffed up his knee, and his knee's bleeding. Well, he comes in, and Mom, Dad, I fell off my bike, and he's crying, and his knee is bleeding, and it's hurting. Father said, boy, real men don't cry. I'm ashamed of you. I want my son to be a manly man, not a little sissy boy that cries. You go to your mom. Sissy boys, they run with their moms. Manly men and dads go together. Okay? A couple of weeks later, he scuffs up his knee again, bleeding. And he comes in, and this time Mom sees him. My boy, what's the matter? Oh, you're bleeding. He goes, that's okay, Mom. It doesn't hurt. I'm fine. Dad says, that's my boy. That's my boy. Daddy's proud of you now. Come on, Dad will take care of your knee. See, this kid now has learned to distort feelings and act a certain way to get Dad's approval. And I think that Rogers was absolutely on target for that. How many times have we done something like that or had something like that happen to us? Daddy's not proud of you if you do that, if you act that way. See? So, a child begins to believe he can receive love, affection, approval by behaving in a certain way or denying or distorting other feelings that he has. Well, Rogers, he said that in person-centered therapy, there has got to be certain elements. The therapist has to give what's called unconditional positive regard. Unconditional positive regard. This is where the counselor will support and accept the client regardless of the client's behavior. Basically, it's unconditional acceptance. Well, with that said, there's a couple of things that have to be present every time that a PCT session is taking place. One, it has to be non-judgmental. Another, the therapist has to have unconditional positive regard. Okay. Now, later on there'll be another slide that adds the therapist has to be genuine or authentic. And I really believe in that because the therapist is a role model. And so if this person says something that makes the therapist angry, I think it's more than appropriate to say, you know, hearing what you went through makes me angry. I can't imagine the things you must have felt. See, being genuine, being who, being genuine with the feelings, with who they are. So there you go. You have to be authentic, genuine. You have to give unconditional positive regard, and you have to exhibit accurate empathy, feeling with the client. Not for the client, but with the client. And that's why I was saying a second ago, wow, you went through that. I'm angry just hearing about it. I can't imagine what you went through. See, that's really being very empathetic. The goal of Rogerian therapy is to create a non-judgmental setting, to facilitate personal growth and development, to eliminate feelings of distress, to increase self-esteem and openness to experience, and to enhance the client's understanding of him or herself. Basically, what happens is the person learns to accept themselves and trust themselves. Trust their feelings. Trust their judgments, where they have been taught to challenge, to mistrust those things, or to distort those feelings, to admit those feelings, to trust them, to let them come out. What are the criticisms of PCT? You cannot use this in a life-threatening situation. You cannot use this in a crisis. And I'll show you why in a minute. It's great at first, but some people say that after you use that to join with your client, which means getting a therapeutic alliance, after you join with your client, sometimes switching to a different form of therapy can be more beneficial. And I've done that. I've started out with PCT to try and help a person, get to know them, get them relaxed, get them where they feel like they can trust you and open up, and then maybe switch to REBT. Okay. All right. What are some objections I personally have? Well, the first one there, not to be used in a crisis or a life-threatening situation. Now, I'm going to give you some extreme examples, but the first example is a true example. I had a client one time come in and tell me he was suicidal. Okay? Now, I told you that we have to go to different seminars and such to get continuing education units. Well, I was at a seminar and our speaker was a purist Rogerian. Now, y'all know what a purist is, correct? 100%. Well, this purist was talking, and at the break, I thought this is a perfect time. I can get some personal questions answered. And so I went up and I said, there's a lot of things I like about Rogerian therapy, but there's some things that I think are really kind of bumps in the road. Thank you. And so he said, well, give me an example. I said, okay. What would you say if, wait a minute, I gotta clear my throat. What would you say if you had a client come in, sit down, and say, I want to thank you for all that you have done with me in therapy. I've made more progress with you than any other therapist. I said, well, that's very nice, thank you. And he said, but I think I've gone as far as I can go. I don't think that I can make any more progress in therapy under anybody. He said, I'm very pleased with what we've done, but I don't think I can make any more progress. Therefore, when I go home, I'm going to get my shotgun. I'm going to put it in my mouth, and I'm going to blow my head off. I said, what would you say? You can't tell him that you disagree with this. What would you say? Hey, I'm so proud of you. When you started coming here, you couldn't set a goal. You weren't motivated. Look at this. Now you got a goal. You're going to go right home and carry it through. Way to go. And he looked at me and he said, I've been looking for a response like that for 15 years. May I use that? That is the best I have ever heard. And I said, what? And he said, that's the best I've ever heard. He said, may I use it? I said, you can have it, just don't credit me. You never, ever tell somebody who's suicidal that you agree with them, that it's a good idea, and that you're proud of them from coming up with it. You never do that. If somebody comes in then with PCT, when you're using Rogerian, you can't use that form of therapy with them. That's one of the bad things about that. You can't use it in a crisis situation. Because remember, one of the big things about PCT, you have to have unconditional regard. Unconditional positive regard. Unconditional acceptance. So if you disagree, that automatically does not accept what they say, which violates one of the main tenets. So, that kind of, to me, is not a real good thing to have in your arsenal when when you have that kind of a thing holding you up. The other thing, and again, now this one's really, really out there, but let's say somebody comes in and first time you're seeing them, you say, well, it's nice to meet you. Why are you here? Court ordered. Okay. Why did the court order you here? I'm on probation. I have to see you to maintain probation. Okay, what are you on probation for? You're really going to be pushy, aren't you? Well, I'll tell you what I'm on probation for. I love having sex with little 7-year-old boys. And I'm telling you, I think about it all the time. I love it, I enjoy it, and I don't think that I want to get past that because it is something that is part of me. And so, you can say whatever you want, but I think that this ought to be legalized and I ought to be able to do what I want with my body. Wow. I'm telling you right now, if somebody comes into me and tells me they're a child molester, even if they're on probation, first of all, I refer them out. I have a bias. If a therapist feels very strongly about something, they have a duty to refer them out so that they'll get the best therapy they can. I could not be a therapist for a a child molester, but I certainly would have a hard time trying to be one and be a Rogerian therapist. You have to accept what they say. It's unconditional positive regard, a non-judgmental setting. How do you do that in a situation like I'm talking about? And like I said, that's pretty far-fetched, but it's a question that I have as a therapist. I've always had that as a question. How would a Rogerian therapist be able to address that kind of behavior, that kind of thinking, and help them to overcome it? I'm not that talented. I can't answer that question. Well, I have another video for you to see. They're going to do PCT, and so let me pull that up. I don't know if y'all have seen this one or not. The Australian, yeah, okay. I don't have to show that to you after all. Yeah, you saw where, no, we had just finished it up and y'all bugged out. Correct? Isn't that right? Let me show it again. It's not that much, but we need to process it. You're looking at me like I'm nuts. Hopefully this will hold up.
Thanks for disclosure.
Yeah, so you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable discussing such personal information with an outsider?
Yes, it is. I'm a bit awkward. I was brought up to solve your problems yourself. And you don't go outside the family, you don't take your problems to strangers. And I would normally do, but also I realise now that given the depth of the problem, that I also need to get another perspective on things.
Okay, all right. I guess what I generally say to people when they first come along is that it's not uncommon to feel quite uncomfortable talking to an outsider about such personal information. And
Try that one again. Where did it go?
Click edge.
This one?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And you have two of them on. Click the edge.
What's,
You have two tabs on. Get out of one of them.
I got you right here. Okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, I suppose the bottom line is that I'm having some difficulties in my relationship with my wife, and I'm very uncertain about actually being here, and it's a bit embarrassing talking about these things with a stranger.
Yeah, so you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable discussing such personal information with an outsider?
Yes, it is. I'm a bit awkward. I was brought up to solve your problems yourself.
Yeah.
Listen to how she reflects.
Outside the family, we don't take your problems to strangers. And I would normally do, but also I realise now that given the depth of the problem, that I also need to get a different perspective on things.
Okay, all right. I guess what I generally say to people when they first come along is that it's not uncommon to feel quite uncomfortable talking to an outsider about such personal information, and even though I can't predict exactly how you're going to feel and how things will go for you today, I do know that in the past a lot of other people have actually felt quite uncomfortable to begin with, but as they've been able to talk and get things off their chest, they actually feel quite relieved. So you might find that as we spend more time together, that you're more comfortable in this environment too.
Well, I hope it works out that way.
Yeah. We'll see how we go.
Well, there's a friend of mine who'd been involved in counselling previously and suggested that this is what I should attempt to do anyway.
Okay. And you were saying before as well that normally you like to solve things yourself and work things out yourself, and I think it's quite a balanced perspective to be looking at how you're going to resolve things yourself, and also to get an outside perspective as well. So I can see lots of benefit that can come from that dual approach.
Well, I haven't succeeded in doing it by myself, so
Yeah.
it's worth a go.
Yeah, so perhaps we can shed some light on some helpful approaches for you. Yeah. Okay. I guess to help me understand your situation, it'd be helpful if you could talk a little bit about what's been going on for you and what's brought you along.
Well, I suppose things have just deteriorated in my relationship with my wife, Angelina. We've been married 11 years now. We've got 2 kiddies, Johnny's 9 and Jackie is 7.
Right.
And she's very busy in her job, and she's always been, I suppose, a bit of a control freak.
Right.
She likes things to be just so. And occasionally she would, what I would call it, lose the plot, and she'd yell at me and abuse me. But in the past that was never a problem, because we could sit down and talk about it, and she'd recognise that she'd probably gone over the top and whatever. But lately it's really just gotten out of hand, and she's not controlling her anger or temper, and it really concerns me now, because I think it's starting to affect the kids.
Right, okay. So it sounds like to begin with she might often become quite angry, but she would settle down and you could resolve things, but of late it's become a lot more volatile, and she's become more explosive, and you're really concerned about the impact on yourself and the children.
Yeah, I mean, the kids are young, and I mean, John is a boy, and he seems to be handling things okay. But you're always uncertain as to really how things are affecting him. Jackie's only 7, as I said, and she's a lot more sensitive. She's not really handling things too well at all. And that's really starting to put a lot of extra concern to me.
Yeah, okay. So it sounds like you've got a lot of concerns about both the kids, and John's probably handling it okay outwardly, even though obviously he's feeling it. But Jackie, you're particularly concerned about, which is quite delicate, and you're worried about that impact. And all of you are walking around on eggshells at the moment, just waiting for some kind of explosion to happen. Does that sound right?
Well, I'm concerned about the kids, but I'm concerned about the marriage. It's important to me to do what you can to keep things together, because that's better for the kids. But if I had to single out one major concern, it would be probably for Jackie.
Okay.
Because there's been a few incidents lately where the kids have been exposed.
Did you would say something and she'd turn around and say the exact same thing, but in different words. See, that's reflecting. She didn't parrot it, she didn't mirror it, but she said exactly what he had been saying, but just in different words and rephrasing it. What are y'all's opinion about this form of therapy?
It's healthy for some people, it's healthy for some people, but in other cases, it may not be. It might be tomorrow.
That's my feeling. It's very helpful for some people, but it's not helpful for everybody. But I'm just one person, and she's got her opinion too.
Also, it helps, I guess, like, it helps the person kind of think you're like on the same page with them. Kind of like, okay,
You say they want to get you on the same page?
yeah, and kind of make you agree, like the therapist agrees with the person.
Absolutely. You know, therapy, and that's that unconditional positive regard. Yes, I agree with this. Yeah. Anybody else? How would you feel if you were in a session and that was the type of therapy that you were receiving?
I would think that the therapist is just saying stuff that I want to hear.
These masks are terrible. You would,
I would think that therapists are just saying things that I would like to hear.
okay. She said she would just think that the therapist was saying whatever would make her feel better. And I can't totally disagree with that. Because, again, unconditional positive regard, you know, unconditional acceptance, non-judgmental. And like we said earlier, for some disorders, this is excellent. But for some others, I don't see how it can be used. Thank you for sharing. I'm gonna stay out of the camera as much as possible. Well, now we're moving on. We finished the humanism. We're going on to the biological model. Biological model really focuses on genetics, heredity, and physiological processes. How does the mind affect the body? How does the body affect the mind? What are the physiological processes in thinking? Okay? Now, it's called the biological model, but it's also called the physiological model. And it's also called the medical model. It's also called the disease model. So any of these is going to refer to a biological approach. Well, you saw a film on the history of psychology, and it mentioned phrenology. It really didn't go too much into Hippocrates. Hippocrates, the father of medicine. If we want to, we could say that he may have been one of the first to really try and explain personality by bodily processes. He said that the fluids in the body determine your personality. That if blood was dominant on that you would be a happy, outgoing person. If you had an abundance of phlegm, you would be laid back and passive. If you had an abundance of bile, you might be kind of melancholy, depressed type of person. And so he tried to align personality traits with bodily fluids. He called them humors, bodily humors, Humours. Then with a book in the film did talk about phrenology, and that's the feeling of the bumps and dents in a person's head and aligning personality traits with those particular bumps and dents. Now, as the film said, in as much as that is ridiculous, there was a grain of truth. Because it wasn't the skull and the dents and the bumps in the skull, but we do know there are locations of the brain that are responsible for certain things. And so instead of the dents and bumps in the skull, they may have been on the right track, thinking of being in the right area of the brain. Okay? William Sheldon in the 40s tried to align body types with personalities. He said that if you had a rectangular body type, that you would have an assertive, energetic type of personality called a mesomorph. If you are kind of a round type person, then you would love comfort, you would be very outgoing, you would be an endomorph. And if you're a real thin person, restrained, lonely, an ectomorph. Okay? Now, if we just, let's say, stopped it right here and just play a little mental game for a minute and not go where he went, but go to a logical conclusion, what could be a big question with what the information you have right now? Okay, she said it doesn't matter what size you are if you have issues. Okay, you're kind of on the right track where I'm going. Okay. Folks. Okay, it kind of labels them just because. You already are biased, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I guess if you're a certain body type, you will conform to those feelings, like you would try to conform yourself to.
All right, that's a good observation, that if you have that kind of body type, if you knew that, say, a thin person was supposed to be restrained and lonely, would that affect you, and then you would try and act that way and conform to that? Okay, that's a great question. Let me ask you a question. What if a child was very, very thin when they were growing up, and then, as they became adult, became fat? How would that affect that theory? Because that would theoretically mean that their personality would have to change completely. So, did it mean that they had an outgoing personality that was just waiting for them to gain weight? Or that, something happened and they're still a lonely, supposed to be lonely and restrained, still might be lonely and restrained, but have gained weight? Where does it end? Where does it end? And so, I really would like for y'all to think farther than just right here. Take it to its natural conclusion, okay? All right. You will have a second assignment open up within the next 24 to 48 hours. It is a written assignment. You are to you're supposed to write half of your paper convincing me that nature is completely responsible for your personality. Then the other half of your paper, you have to convince me that nurture is responsible for your personality. Now, the hitch is, I don't want an opinion paper. You have to find some facts. You can go to Google Scholar. You can, there's all kinds of places to find some factual information. I do not want you to say, well, I grew up in such and such an environment, and I'm supposed to be that way, but I'm not. And so nature doesn't work. Or nurture doesn't work. So that's going to be your assignment. And today, oh, my watch is dead. Today's the 22nd, isn't it? You do the 29th. Okay? You have 1 week to read it. So let's talk about nature versus nurture. This is probably one of the longest, most intense debates in psychology. Okay? Is nature responsible 100% for who you are? Does heredity play 100% in determining who you are? All your personality traits, all of your behaviors, all of your preferences. Is heredity responsible for it? Then, nurture is the environment. Did you learn everything that you are? Did you learn how to be a pleasant person? Did you learn how to be an angry person? Did you learn how to be a intellectual? I mean, when we talk, and we're going to have the next chapter on nothing but nature, biology, and then after that we do the nurture chapter. But here, they're wanting to know, and I'm wanting to know, is heredity 100% responsible for who you are, or is environment 100% responsible? Now, I talked to you a minute ago about thinking things to the logical conclusion. Let's take things to the logical conclusion about heredity. Before I do that, I want to tell you where I got the idea for this assignment. When I was in grad school, first day, we had to write a paper, and the instructor said, okay, I want a research paper, and ours had to be a research paper. Yours, 1 to 2 pages. I want a research paper, and you absolutely have to convince me that nature is responsible for personality. And I'm working through this, and I thought, and I'm reading this stuff, I thought that I had an idea of what was going on, but this is incredible. I never knew this stuff. I guess that heredity is responsible for everything. Got through with my paper, turned it in, and that day he made another assignment. I want you to write a paper convincing me environment is responsible for everything of who you are. Has to be scholarly sources. So now I'm going through, working through this, getting all these guys make an incredible point too. I hadn't thought about this, I hadn't thought about that. This is really, really a great point. And so, my first thing to tell you is, if you talk to somebody who is a purist for the environment, they have really, really great arguments. And if you talk to somebody that is nature oriented, they will have great arguments. That's one reason the thing has not been settled, because both of them come up with very good arguments, and nobody has locked down the absolute answer. Now, let's say that, for the sake of illustration, let's say that there has been a gene discovered that's a wife-beating gene. Okay? Obviously, this gene now is, since it's in the DNA, it's going to be passed down generation to generation. So, guy comes up in court, the judge says, "Sir, how do you plead?" "Well, Judge, I don't know." "Well, did you do it?" "Well, yes, sir, I beat her." "Well, then you're guilty." "No, sir. It's in my genes. I couldn't help myself." I mean, if you have a predisposition towards something, how can you help it? My great-granddaddy beat his wife. My granddaddy beat his wife. My daddy beat my mama. I mean, it's in the DNA. We can't do anything about it. So I did it, but I'm not guilty. One of the things about this day and age is we do try and find ways to shift responsibility of our behavior. And it would be so easy to try to do that if absolutely everything was determined by DNA. Environment. Well, let me give you an example of an individual, and we'll dissect them both, nature and nurture. One of my relatives, one of the nicest guys you'd ever meet. Everybody loved him. He was the go-to guy if you had a problem. Absolutely just salt of the earth guy. Really cool guy. Well, when he was born, his father died shortly after he was born. Now, he didn't have his daddy there in the environment to model. But when he became an adult, look at Jack. Jack's just like his dad. Jack is the spitting image of his dad. He behaves just like his dad. Everything's just like his dad. Now, if you take a heredity point of view, you would say, that's a beautiful example, because he didn't have his dad to model after. He didn't have his dad around to mumble that when he talked, and everybody says, well, you talk just like your daddy. He didn't have his dad around to develop these personality traits. And so it would figure it has to be 100% heredity, because there's no other way that you could explain Jack, is there? Well,
If somebody knew his dad before when he was living, and they was in his life,
that's brilliant. Absolutely. Let's say that as a little boy, he does some little thing and somebody says, oh, that's just like your daddy used to do. Isn't that cute? That's positive reinforcement. And if every time he did something like his daddy, and mom reinforced it, and sister reinforced it, and aunts and uncles reinforced it, he could learn those behaviors. So, you can make, if you really want to, you can make a court case either way, heredity or environment. See? And that's why I want you to research both, because when you get through, it'll be interesting what you determine how you're going to feel and how you're going to believe. Well, behavioralism, we have three guys that are really, really big in behavioralism. John Watson, B.F. Skinner, and Ivan Pavlov. If you are a true behavioralist, if you are a purist, a behavioral purist, you will believe that everything that you are, basically everything you do, everything about you will have been learned. Behavioralism is learned behavior, okay? John Watson, the father of behavioralism in America, he said, the focus of behavior exclusively did not come until, this isn't a quote. It is true that behavioralism didn't hit the United States until about 1920. John Watson had read the experiments of Pavlov, Ivan Pavlov. He became very, very interested in them. He began to wonder if some of these things could not be applied to people, to humans, and so he was the one that brought the behavioralism to America. Here is the Watson quote. Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed, and my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take any one of them at random and train him to be any type of specialist that I might choose. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant, chief, yes, even beggar, man, and thief. Regardless of his talents, regardless of his race, regardless of his ancestors. You're going to find out Watson's not my favorite of any of the founding fathers of psychology. He's probably my least favorite. What he says here is nothing else matters except environment. And he could take any one of us as a child and turn him into anything that he wanted. Well, I guess you could look at it that way. But, what he says, if you put them in the right environment, that they will learn to be the person that you are molding them to be. That's, in a way, to me, now that's almost as scary as the idea that everything is controlled by, human brain physiology and heredity. Watson is the father of behavioralism. Then we have B.F. Skinner. Skinner is very, very important in psychology, and he believed that even complex behavior like language could be explained in environmental consequences. Look at these words, environmental consequences, another one of those to link. Whenever you hear about behavioralism, link that with environmental consequences. Environmental consequences, that's punishments and rewards. But whenever you hear behavioral, think environmental consequences. I would write that down, circle it, put a star by it, write important, and highlight it. Okay? He believed that even language could be explained in terms of environmental consequences. So he's saying that even language is controlled by us learning it in our environment. In addition to his many scientific publications, he also wrote Walden 2, which was based on the principles of behavioralism. Skinner's approach is known as operant conditioning, and we will be studying that very shortly. He subscribed to the behavioral approach early on, and he also argued early on against the use of theories to explain behavior. So things like the structure of the mind. He said, no. He said, you don't need theories to explain behavior. We learn everything. Simple as that. Their view of mankind is tabula rasa, blank slate. This means that when you come down the chute and you enter the world, you haven't got anything up here, that you learn everything. Everything in your life is learned. You're a blank slate, just waiting to have new things written on your slate to help you to become the person you are. What time is it? 11:35? 45. I've got 20 minutes then. Okay. Will you give me a high five, or a high five sign at 5 minutes till? Thank you. So tell me about behavioralism. Well, it's about learning. They are very, very interested in the learning process. But it's learning through rewards and punishments. Tabula rasa, they believe you're born with a blank slate. Very, very, very important that this is what is responsible for our learning, rewards, and punishments. Biggie. The behavioralism is not concerned with mental processes. If you come to a behavioralist and you said, I had a dream about the woman giving me balloons last night, it was very good. I'm so glad you had a good night's sleep. What can I help you with? But if you come to them and say, my child is having a temper tantrum 3 times a week, and this has got to stop, they are going to be really, really into this. That's their sirloin steak, because it's behavior that you can see and behavior you can measure. That's all they're concerned with. Overt behavior, behavior you can see, behavior you can measure. He's having 3 temper tantrums a week. Well, that's 12 a month. I think that in 6 months, we can have that down to about 6 a month. And they'll set a goal like that. And they can count how many temper tantrums. You can see temper tantrums. And so that's just, that's something they could get very excited about. Okay. A few weeks ago I told you that humanism is absolutely opposite to Freud. Humanism is absolutely opposite to Freud, 100% opposite. Behavioralism is absolutely opposite to biological. And think of it, nature versus nurture, biological versus behavioral. Absolute opposites. Nothing crosses over. 100% opposite. And as much as I emphasize this and have slides and go over it and give examples and examples, when I used to give this on a paper test, 60 to 70% would miss this. Behavioralism, even though they are opposite of biological, they don't get along with the humanists. Okay? They don't get along with the humanist. The humanist says, hey, the behavioral, they try and take tests that they do on animals and apply them to humans. You can't do that. And behavioralists say, yes, we can. And so they don't agree but they're not as opposite as behavioral and biological, okay? Also, the structural or the cognitive don't get along with the behavioralists that much, except you gotta remember, you've got your cognitive behavioral psychology where you blend those two, and that is a beautiful blend that's still used to this day. Well, we have talked about 5 different types of approaches. Those 5 types are still up and running right now. They may be in a little bit different form, but what I have taught you is the 5 basic types. Now, there's 2 others that we have not gone over, but you need to know these 7, okay? Remember, psychodynamic perspective, that's Freud's. That's you know, it is, here, it's a more modern type of Freud. It says more focused on the development of sense of self and discovery of other motivations behind a person's behavior rather than as much emphasis on sex and sexual motivations. So, psychodynamic, Freudian, behavioral, we just talked about them. It became a major force in the 20th century, around the 1920s, I believe. Skinner introduced the concept of reinforcement. Humanism, still going. It owes far more to philosophy than any other discipline. And it did spill over into psychology and became an independent approach called the third force. Humanists believe that people have free will, freedom to choose. Early founders, Maslow, Rogers, they emphasize human potential. And remember, when you talk about humanism, remember self-actualization. That's their big thing. That and the free choices. Biopsychological perspective. Now, here is more of the biological approach, but it is now, that part is called neuroscience. It attributes human and animal behavior to biological events occurring in the body, such as genetic influences, hormones, and the activity of the nervous system. Our next chapter is going to be on the biology of the nervous system. The cognitive perspective focuses on memory, intelligence, perception, problem solving, and learning. Then we have the 2 that we have not studied. Sociocultural perspective focuses on the relationship between social behavior and culture. Could we define this as kind of a small blending of sociology and psychology? Evolutionary perspective, they focus on the biological basis of universal mental characteristics that all humans share. They look at the way the mind works and why it works as it does, and they see behavior as having an adaptive value, a survival value. Now, we have almost finished what's called personality chapter. There's one last thing here about the personality chapter that we have not touched. This is the trait approach. Now, there are all kinds of approaches that fall under the trait approach. They all have 3 things in common. Okay? They all have 3 things in common. One is personality traits are relatively stable over time. When my mother died, she had people at the funeral that knew her as a child. And she had people at her funeral that knew her as an adult, and people at her funeral that knew her in her late years. And yet every one of them described her personality the same way. Everybody described her as a certain way, same way I would describe her. A very happy, loving, Southern Belle type lady that was always loving on people and yada yada, okay? But everybody was seeing that. No matter what time of her life, they knew her. And so personality traits are relatively stable over time. Personality traits are relatively stable across situations. And this is why you can you can predict how people are going to act in a certain situation. All right? Let's say that that there's this guy, and when he goes to Walmart, whenever he finally has to go into checkout, he becomes rude, irritable, and inevitably embarrasses whoever with him. Okay? When he goes to Kroger and he gets in the checkout line, he becomes rude, irritable, and embarrasses anybody who's with him. At Christmas time, when he has to go mail packages at the post office and there's going to be a long line, how is he going to act? You said bad, but come on, I know y'all know. Do what? Same way. Rude, irritable, and going to embarrass himself. Now, here, never even met the guy, and yet can tell how he's going to act in that situation. Because that's the way his personality is, no matter where the location in the same circumstances, he's going to act the same way. That's his personality traits, and they will stay stable across situations. People differ in how much of a particular trait they possess. No two people are exactly alike. My husband, he and his first wife had twin girls. Identical twin girls. And to this day, if they put on the same outfit and do their hair the exact same way, even though I've been married to Chris for 15 years, I have to really concentrate on figuring out who's who. I mean, they even wear basically the same kind of glasses, okay? Both of them, to say they're intelligent is an insult. They're so far beyond intelligent that I couldn't tell you how smart they are. Jennifer went into science. She went into chemistry, she went into science, got her degree in science, and she is now the, I'm not sure if it's vice person or the head. I think she's the administrator of one of the county crime labs in California. She was the assistant administrator of the crime lab in Orange County, which is the exact place where they autopsied Michael Jackson. So she is also already known as a national expert on the effects of drinking and on a person and how it affects driving. Brilliant person. Like I said, she's over a crime lab. She's a national expert in DWI and how alcohol affects person. Now, Erin, brilliant. She got a degree in business, got a master's in marketing, and she started out working for Toyota, and she did so well there that they recruited her from Walmart, and she then was over all the Mattel toys all over the world from Walmart. Mattel was so impressed with her, they went to her and hired her from Walmart, and she's one of the vice presidents over there. Just tearing it up because she is so brilliant in that field. Yes? Oh, 5 minutes, very good. So, now, they are identical twins, and there's so much identical alike about them, but they're not completely. They do differ in some traits. See? And so not everybody, not even identical twins, are absolutely identical. I guess we need to do. Keep them on open. Okay. You will start passing this around. All right. Anybody got any questions? Anybody got any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Every time I go to the store now, and they change it around, I think about psychological.
Absolutely. You're what? Everybody good with what we did today? Anybody got any questions? Any comments? Any criticisms? Well, we only have, I think, 2 more slides, and we're finished with this chapter, and then we are almost finished with the entire unit. Don't forget, I'm going to open up a written assignment for y'all, and I'll see you all Thursday. Did I forget something? Y'all have a great week.